And we released some new features that we've been working very hard on, and we would like to present them to you so you know what's new and how it works. And I will also give a short update on some other things we're working on at the moment in the background that should be coming your way sometime soon. One general announcement for now is we would like to record this session, not your faces or anything, and any questions you ask we can cut out if you prefer, but just so that we can send it to a few of the people who could not attend but wanted to see it later as well. So just like you guys know, we will be recording this session. So this is the agenda for today. I'll give a short introduction of who on earth I actually am and what the new features are we added last week and what we are currently working on. And after that, we have some room for questions and discussion where you can also give some input on what we are doing. So first of all, very nice to meet you all. I'm Anouk Dutrée. I'm a product owner at UbiOps. I have a background in nanobiology from the Technical University Delft. Might sound very unrelated, but it had a large chunk of data science in there, and I found that a lot more interesting than the biology. So the biology I kicked out and moved on to do a lot of data science projects. And now I'm working at UbiOps, and I'm mainly concerned with what new features we should be adding, gathering input from our users, and checking what our roadmap should look like. So I'm very curious to learn from you guys if these features we've added match with your expectations, if you see room for improvement. We're always happy to hear that. So yeah, let's take a look at what we actually did. The first of the new features we added, and I think also one of the biggest ones, is that we now have R support. So it is now possible to deploy R code on UbiOps. Previously, it was only possible to do Python, but we've worked really hard to make sure that R code can also be supported to accommodate the data scientists that work in R. It works very similar to Python, and I'll show it in a bit in the UI how the workflow looks for R. But the main difference is that it's a slightly different deployment package structure. But we also pre-installed some packages, some common R packages to speed things up for the building. These are the following packages: so tidyverse, here, remotes, and renv, and some other ones which can be found on our documentation page. I will share the link in a bit if you want to know everything that we've installed in the background, just to make sure you can get going as quickly as possible. So let's take a look at how this actually works. So for this deployment package, what might be good to know is that it is published on our GitHub as well. So on our GitHub, when you go to our UbiOps repository and then to deployment template, we have an R deployment template now as well, with a template deployment package and an explanation of how it works. So what is exactly in there? It has the classical deployment structure in a way, but now instead of a deployment.py, it needs a deployment.r. And for what normally would be the requirements.txt for Python to manage the dependencies, now you can either choose from an install packages.r or an renv lock template, renv lock to lock your R environment, basically to make sure that all the dependencies are all right. So any of these can be used to manage your dependencies, whichever feels more comfortable to you. For the install packages, it just works like this. So for instance, you can add install.packages random forest to make sure that the random forest package is installed as well. Then for the deployment.r, it works quite similar to the deployment.py we have for Python, but now it doesn't have a class because classes is not really something in R. But it needs two methods. It has the init method and the request method. In the init function, or the init method is the initialization method for the deployment. So this is what we run whenever we spin up a new instance of your deployment. So this can be used for loading modules that have to be kept in memory, or setting up connections, loading a trained model file, for instance, just to make sure that everything's ready in memory. Then we have the other method, which is the request method. And this is the method UbiOps actually calls whenever you make a request to your deployment. So this is where really your actual code goes. For this example, we've only have a really straightforward thing that returns the input multiplied by a random number, but of course you can add anything here that you want. So this can be the place where you call the predict function of a trained model, for instance, or do some pre-processing, some training, anything, yeah, any piece of code that you really want to run, that should go in here. What we've also done is added a run deployment.r in this template, like on our Git repository. This is so you can test out locally before you push it to UbiOps if it actually works. So if you run this run deployment.r, it will call the deployment as if UbiOps would do. So to simulate it, and in this way you can catch some errors early to make sure that your deployment package will work when you push it to UbiOps. Then let's see how that then actually works in the UI. So I can create a new deployment just as usual. Go to the deployment page in your UbiOps account and create a new deployment. I need to give it some type of name. So for instance, our test, and I need to specify the input and the output that is expected by my deployment. In this case, I've got a very simple input value called input, which is a double precision. What might be good to know is that right now I'm using the structured data, so I can specify really what data type is expected, but plain is also supported. In this way, you can pass anything as strings and we don't do any type checking. So I've got input, double precision. And for output, I've got an output field named output, and it's also a double precision type. I can add some labels. So for instance, I can add the label language, R language. So if I want to filter on the deployments later that are all, written in R, I can filter that using the labels. Then now we can specify the actual version of this deployment. So this is the place where we actually upload our code. So I have to specify what language it is written in. It's written in R. At the moment, we only support R 4.0. And then I can upload my deployment package, which I have here, which is the same one I just showed in Visual Studio Code just now. There are some advanced parameters, just like for the Python one, to take care of memory allocation and the minimum and maximum number of instances for scaling purposes. Right now, I'll just leave it for at the default values because that's perfectly fine. And I also don't need any environment variables. So I can just click create, and now we'll start building. And when it's done, we can actually use it and make requests to it. So while that's going on, are there maybe already any questions about the R functionality we've added? Nope. Okay, that's perfectly fine. Then another thing we've added, so I'll just leave this going in the back. We can check up on it later. So the next feature I wanted to talk to you about that we've added last week is the option to add email notifications or monitoring emails for failed requests. So whenever you have, for instance, a deployment or a pipeline in production, and you want to make sure that you know when it fails, that you can be notified and resolve the issue as quickly as possible, you can now add a monitoring email address to your deployment version. And to this email address, a monitoring email will be sent whenever a failed request has happened, and also when it has been recovered for the first time since the failed request. These emails can also be sent to non-users as well. So for instance, if you have a person from the general IT department that doesn't have a UbiOps account himself, but still wants to be notified if something crashes in production, this can also be used as an email address so that they know. And I can show you how it looks as well. This one is done in the meantime. So now that we have our deployment, we can create a request to it, either a direct request or a batch request, just like for Python deployments. In this case, it just needs a number. So I can create a direct request and it will give me back the output. And that's it. And what we can now also do is add a monitoring email. I will add that to another deployment. So, wait, no, I will add it to this one, that's easiest. So if I want to receive monitoring emails for this deployment that I've just made, so for the R deployment I just made, I can edit that on the version level. So either whenever you create a new version, you can add it, or you can edit it in later. So here's this extra field now, monitoring emails, and any email you will put in here will receive these monitoring emails. So I can, for instance, put my own there. And oh, your faces are right in front of the button I need to click. So now I can save this, and if a request is made to this deployment now and it fails, I will receive a monitoring email. I can show this for another one for which I already did that. So I have here a deployment to which I am registered to receive monitoring emails whenever a request fails for that one. So I will create a failing request now. I have a file here. This one. And if I create a request now, this request will fail because I've just put in something that the script is not meant for. And so yeah, here we see the request failed because an exception occurred. What will happen is that I will also receive this email, and I will receive an email like this. So what has happened, what was the event, in this case a failed request, in which project it was, which exact deployment it was, and which version it was. And now I can also click on the button view logs to be redirected to the logs indicating what actually happened. So you can find out what caused this error actually. In this case, a bunch of things went wrong because I put in the wrong type of input data. But for instance, if a connection to a database crashes in the deployment, this is a clear thing you would see here then, like connection could not be made to the database. That's just as an example. So those are the email notifications that can be added. And one smaller thing we've also done is the out-of-memory errors. Out-of-memory errors are notoriously hard to catch, and we wanted to give our users a bit more insight in this so that they can allocate more memory to a deployment if needed to avoid these errors. So what happens now that if you have a deployment that doesn't have enough memory allocation for what it needs to do, for the job it needs to do, and you make a request to it and it crashes because it doesn't have enough memory, then what will happen is that in the logs, we will log the following message, that there was, that the memory usage peak, like how high the memory usage peak was and what the average memory usage peak was, so that you can see exactly where you need to put your threshold for memory allocation, so that you can see like, oh, this was too high for what I had allocated for my deployment, maybe I should up it. So that you can take care of that and that it's actually properly logged to the logs and you can do something about it. And those were the new features I wanted to touch upon for now. Other than that, we did a bunch of smaller things like some UX improvements, but you can read those in the release notes. And for now, I just wanted to give a quick overview of what the next steps are. So what is going on at the moment in the background with us. One of the things we're working really hard on is to allow long-running requests. At the moment, we have a request duration limit of 1 hour, because we're primarily geared for short and quick requests. But we also want to accommodate longer jobs. For instance, if you want to train a model, this can sometimes take quite long. So we are working on allowing that so that you have another type of deployment, basically, which can run much longer. And this would allow requests of over 1 hour and most likely up to 48 hours. We're also working on request storage. We got the question quite a few times from our users now, if it will be possible to store all the requests that are made so that you can do data analysis on that later or check for patterns. And we're working on that so that you have the possibility to store all your requests if you want to. If you don't want to store your request, that's also perfectly fine with us. It's not something that will be mandatory. It's just a toggle you can switch on, where you'll be allowed to store all your requests if you want to. We're also working on some monitoring improvements. We will be adding a monitoring dashboard soon, where you can check the aggregated metrics, the monitoring metrics of your project, or compare specific deployment versions to each other. So say you have some type of model, an LSTM network, for instance, and you have one that's trained on a specific set, and you retrain it and you want to check if it's actually better than the first version you had. Right now, we will add a compare tab where you can compare the metrics of one version with the other version of the model so that you can see if it's actually working better or not. And some more UX improvements are coming your way. So feel free to join our Slack community and indeed let us know if anything that we should be working on via either the Slack community or the support portal, and then we can take a look. And I think that's it for today then. I hope it was clear everything and that you're excited to use the new features, and I hope to see you soon.